I'm James Page, one of the Associate Directors here in the engagement team. It's brilliant to see lots of familiar faces here tonight and quite a few new faces as well. Before we start, I just want to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I pay my respect to their elders past and present, and all of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. For those of you who aren't familiar with Ethos Urban, we're a collective of planners, engagement specialists, designers and economists who work in an integrated manner. We have offices in Brisbane, Melbourne and Sydney, and some of our employees are on the PIA New South Wales board and also the IAP2 local network, which is why we're hosting the event tonight. We truly believe that great engagement leads to good planning outcomes. So we're really excited to be hosting this event tonight about changes to the Planning Act, which is of course perfectly timed for the changes which are going to take effect tomorrow. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our MC for the night, which is Margie Harvey, who is one of the IAP2 board members.
Thank you. So I'm here both as a board member, and I was chosen because I have actually done a fair few projects with the department, but significantly I'm currently working on the environmental impact assessment guidelines, which we're still assessing submissions that we had, but largely those improvements to EIA really have as their core earlier and better community engagement. So that's kind of another exciting venture that's coming later. There's obviously a lot of interest in tonight, and a lot of people were turned away, so you're the lucky people that are here, planners and community engagement people. Some of you know I'm married to a planner, and he thinks that everything that I know about planning he's taught me, and I think everything that he knows about community engagement that I've taught him. You know how that goes. But the exciting thing about this event is we're talking about changes that have been in discussion with the community and with all of us for a long time, and we've got a really great panel that represents the range of different interests of community and of consultants and proponents and of government, including local government. And we're lucky to have people like Geoff Turnbull, who's been one of the community sort of pioneers in this area and have been following this for a long time. So I guess it's an exciting time for many people. The format is mostly going to be your questions, but just to sort of hit it off so that we're all on the same page, Felicity Greenway and Alison Barnard from the department are going to give us a bit of a kind of rundown of where things are at. But just a little bit about Felicity. She's had a lot of years in the Department of Planning, 20 years in planning, and look, a lot of her role has been around high-profile critical infrastructure. And there's a couple of significant things I know that she's done. One was the wind energy guidelines most recently, but also planning reforms for electricity privatisation and for ports privatisation. So they're some of the biggies. She's only recently become the Executive Director of Resources and Industry Policy, and then she was doing that for a short time, and they thought, oh, she's doing so well at that, we'll just throw the legislation on her as well. But she is, I guess, one of the gems of the department, and that's why she has been promoted. And probably one of her greatest skills is that she is a very good communicator and very good at dealing with a range of stakeholders, the topics that we're talking about tonight. With her is Alison Barnard, and Alison's been with the department for a couple of years, and she's the Director of Community Engagement and Communications, and she comes from a background most immediately in Abu Dhabi with a public relations firm, but in the past she has actually spent quite a time in Australia, but was working for the American Embassy. So she wasn't, that's not quite Australia, is it? So, but it's in Australia. So I'll just hand over to you guys and go for it.
So thank you so much for inviting us along this evening. I felt the energy in the room, and it's exactly the same in the Department of Planning. It's an immense and tremendous occasion tomorrow with the commencement of our new legislation. And so it's a truly exciting time, and so we're thrilled to be here this evening to talk about some of the great new things that are part of our legislation. So we'll try and whip through this because we do want to kind of have the discussion with you and not just talk at you. But we'll talk a bit about the journey that we've been on so far and what has motivated us as a planning organisation to get to this point. So both our former minister, Rob Stokes, and our current minister are passionate about community engagement and community participation. And so really, in terms of what are the objectives that have guided us in the development of the legislation, community participation has been at the bedrock from the very, very beginning. Up there, and I'd be remiss to say, Gary White would say, shame on you, Felicity, if I didn't mention the other bedrock is making strategic planning front and centre of the planning system as well. So I'm just channeling Gary there for everyone this evening. Our current minister, Minister Roberts, is also particularly passionate about probity in decision making and ensuring that the important decisions that are made in the planning system are transparent and open and defendable. Another key objective, is around making simpler, faster planning and accessible planning language that, enough with the jargon, let's talk more in plain English. So we're going to play tag team, that's right. Alison and I. So Alison's, yeah, that's right.
So just to bring you through quickly through the process today, tomorrow is really the momentous first deadline or second deadline of what's been a 2-year consultation and legislative process. We kicked off in May of 2016 for the project launch. 2016 was really devoted to a very robust, intensive and deep discussion with stakeholders throughout the state in the form of roundtables, submissions, one-on-one meetings, small group meetings, to really discuss the changes we'd like to make in the legislation and the outcomes. The early part of 2017 was devoted to writing and amending the legislation, and then in August we did part of the first round of legislative instruments in Parliament. So in August of 2017, the mandatory local planning panels, you might see them termed IHAPs, or Independent Hearing and Assessment Panels. That piece of legislation was passed in August 2017, and that's the part that goes into effect tomorrow. So every council in the Sydney and Wollongong area needs to have an IHAP, and we've been working quite closely with all of those councils to help them select members for their IHAPs and chairs for their IHAPs and to get those up and running. And then in November of 2017, the bill went through Parliament. It went through quicker than any of us, I think, anticipated, in 2 days with broad bipartisan support. So it was really a great feeling to see that level of cooperation and support right across the aisle throughout industry. And then here we are today at the first round of implementation with the IHAPs. So, and then we'll go through some of the other timelines for 2018 and 2019 in just a moment.
So for those of us who have been working with the 1979 legislation, we are going to have to go back to basics and relearn what our numbering system is. So there has been some of the changes are major structural changes to the Act and turning to a decimal numbering system. But nobody panic. We've already got some cheat sheets up on our website with some quick references of the most frequently used areas of the Act. So, Section 79C is now 5.15, I think, and so there's a cheat sheet already out there, so we encourage you to access that. So the community participation requirements, in the old Act, I will now say, previously scattered throughout the legislation. So what we've done is consolidated that into Part 2 of the new Act, and also put the mandatory minimum requirements into a Schedule 2 of the new Act.
Okay, to the really good bit, the community participation plans. So the new Act legislates and mandates that all agencies with a planning authority have a community participation plan. Is that better? So that includes us as the Department of Planning, other state government agencies, and also local councils. The community participation plans, we do spell out mandatory minimums, and we do see those only as a baseline minimum. We look forward to really stepping up the community participation part of the legislation and the work. But they must consider the community participation principles. They certainly must meet the minimum mandatory requirements. And planning authorities, this is an important one, they must publish the reason for the decisions. So we want the community to understand that they have a very meaningful part to play early in the process, not just being informed, but co-creating, co-designing, and being part of the process along the way, and then being fully informed of the outcome, not just the outcome, but the reasons for that decision or those decisions, so that they fully understand the process and the outcome therein. So the community participation plans, as I think we've all said, we're really excited about this change. It is a massive cultural change. There's no question about it. We'll go through some of the other timelines in a moment, but it's really exciting, but it is a massive step change. So we'll all be on the journey together, starting with ourselves.
That's right. So the community participation plans are going to have reference to the community participation principles, and they were developed back in around 2013 in the previous planning reforms when we developed a community charter. I'm not going to read through them all, they're obviously up there in the legislation for everyone to see, but really I think at the core of what the principles are about is it's no longer just a tick and flick exercise or lip service to community participation. It's embedded now in the planning legislation that there have to be opportunities for the community to be involved in the planning process, to be genuinely engaged in the planning process and given opportunities to participate, not just people standing at the front of a public meeting and informing them about what's going to happen, but actually participating in that process. And so it really is, as Alison was saying, it is a fundamental change, and that brings challenges as well, which I think we'll get into in the panel discussion, but it's such a tremendous and exciting change in the planning system.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So as Alison was saying, the community participation plans do have to have also at least the minimum mandatory exhibition requirements, which are set out in Schedule 2 of the legislation. But we don't want it to be a race to the bottom. We're certainly encouraging planning authorities to really showcase best practice in community participation plans. And so, but as a minimum requirement, the minimum exhibition requirements need to be set out in the plan. And as Alison also mentioned, one of the new features of the legislation is this concept of a statement of reasons. And there are many planning authorities, local councils, the JRPPs, the PAC, the Planning Assessment Commission. They're already doing this in their assessment reports when they make a determination on applications. They're giving the reasons for that. Really what is happening here is codifying that very good practice of closing the loop on why decisions are being made in the planning system. To not leave the community hanging. You know, what happened to my submission? why didn't anyone kind of consider my views? And so it's such an important loop to close that loop, to give people the reasons for why you've made a decision. Of course, nobody's going to be 100% satisfied. You'll never get a whole kind of community that's satisfied with the decision, but it's so important, as I'm sure you all agree, to at least provide the reasons.
Look, to me, this slide is really a bit of a no-brainer. We've been on the road giving presentations all over the state and the Sydney area in the past few weeks, but the benefits of the community participation plans really are about consistency for not only the industry and the sector, but primarily for the community, so that we're all quite literally, hopefully, looking at the same format of work. We don't want to be so prescriptive, but we do want consistency across the sector so that the community can understand more easily and more effectively be part of the process. And that there is an assurance there that the concerns of the community are heard respectfully. And I think a key point is at relevant points in the process, that they don't feel like they've been left to the very end when it's a bit too late to have any meaningful impact, that they have meaningful input at relevant points in the process, and that we explain in a transparent and open and forthright fashion the decisions and the reason for those decisions, so that everyone can understand the decisions that have been made. So we see these benefits as perhaps long overdue, that the community can really more fully understand what these decisions are and how they impact them, and how their feedback has been taken into account along the way.
So we appreciate we're probably preaching to the converted tonight.
I'm sure.
And that you've all drunk the Kool-Aid probably long before ourselves. And so what I guess tonight hopefully is a bit about okay, now we've got this impetus, this big change in the planning legislation, how are we going to go about doing that together? What I wanted to kind of emphasise also this evening, whilst the legislation is switching on tomorrow, it is really very much a staged implementation program. So, for example, whilst the IAPs are commencing tomorrow, the independent hearing and assessment panels, there is a staged program of works, and so up there is some of the key dates. Importantly, with regard to the community participation plans, the Department of Planning is actually going to put its shoulder behind the wheel and get it stuck into ours this year. But for other planning authorities... Next year.
That's right. So by mid to late 2019, we would expect all planning authorities to be taking part in the community participation plans. So it's a big stream of work, but we're really excited about the work and about the community participation plan pieces of the puzzle and how they're going to fit together in a really helpful, effective and authentic and meaningful way for our communities. And also I should add, to showcase best practice, we know there is... we don't want it to be so prescriptive that it's just another form to do or just another thing people have to do. We do want to showcase the good work that is going on out there, and we're mindful that many agencies are doing very effective consultation, and we want to also be able to showcase that through these plans as well.
And so those timeframes are also up on our website. So if you, I'm sure the presentation is going to be circulated, but if you want to access those as well, they're up on our website. So some of the other big ticket items of the legislation, including local strategic planning statements, again, staged implementation for the metro councils over the next year, but for the rest of the state up to 2019. So we're keen, obviously, to move into the panel discussion, but I'll also just quickly give you, like our website, there is a lot of good information up there. I'm sure, hopefully, you've been able to access. We've got a plain English interactive guide, guide to the new Act. As I said, the cheat sheet on what's old references and what the new reference is, and the timeframes and some other information. But we are available. If you have questions, queries that come up, either myself, Alison, and Nathan Laird in the Legislative Updates team, we're more than happy to speak with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I am Kate. I work at Northern Beaches Council in the community engagement area. Been there about 9 years and have experienced a lot of perspective from a planning, but I'm not a planner, so I'm one of those sort of know a little bit, but enough to get me into trouble.
But knows a lot about community engagement.
Thanks, Margie. Felicity, Greenway. Some of the things I'll just, instead of talking about myself, talk about the Secretary of the department has announced this year it's the year of communication, which is also very apt. So our department is fully enthused and engaged in the year of communication. And so it's very appropriate, timely, that she announced that.
My name's Liz Densley. I'm a project director with Elton Consulting. I've been with Elton for only a short time, 2 years. Prior to that, I was in local government for 20 years. So also representing PIA views tonight.
Both sides of the fence, yes, that's right. Okay, great. All right, so the first question that you know is what is the most significant opportunity presented by the changes? So I might run it along, but if I can get you to just be quite short about it. So what is perhaps the one most significant opportunity? Oh no, it's got a whole book.
Well, I wanted to take us back to some of the earlier sides. Community participation is at the centre of the New South Wales planning system. People from walks of life will now contribute to the shaping of their community through groundbreaking arrangements for community participation. A significant and representative proportion of the community will participate in the development of long-term strategic plans for their area. The planning system can move from combative to collaborative. That, I think, is the opportunity.
I'll just preface this by actually saying Geoff and I know each other, and we've been working together on a project down in Everley for Mirvac and the Australian Technology Park. So the fact that we can sit here next to each other from the proponents team and the community without sort of immediately getting into a fight actually, lends a sense of optimism. The night's young, still got some wine left, but I think the big opportunity here is to re-establish a level of trust with the community and get a clearer idea with Sydney's communities, New South Wales communities, around the really realistically negotiable baseline areas for what they expect their role to be in the planning process, and to increase participation, yes, but actually increase the level of confidence and trust.
From my perspective, I think there's broad-scale opportunities. I think it's absolutely great that both planning and engagement and we're on the same sort of journey together. And I think in terms of the opportunities for me, it's actually about, I think, the getting to people, closing the loop. We've done a lot of work in our council around what drives great community engagement, and it's the opportunity to input, but it's finding out the impact that input had. That's making that consistent and meaningful, I think, will build trust.
My experience on the wind energy framework really just taught me very, very hard that just broad-scale community engagement is the bedrock of success and positive planning outcomes. And so it really must be at the bedrock of the planning system to be successful in our ventures.
I actually just think those last two comments about bedrock and also it closing the gap, bring those two things that have to work together, because you can have great community engagement up front, but if no one understands how you came what came out of at the end some years later, then you have a bit of a disenfranchised community. But I just think the opportunity, having everything, just bringing the language of DCPs and Ps and PAs and DCs all into place is great from just a usability point of view, and so even just that little step, I think, is great from a planning point of view.
I'll actually go back the other way, so I'll actually get you to now talk about...
While you do that, can I just actually move to this end, because the noise is just feedback.
Okay. Okay, well then it's going to go that way, yes.
There you go.
Okay, so that... No, that's fine. So we'll go that way, and you can start again. The challenges. So what do you think are some of the challenges, or just the biggest...
I actually think that my experience in local government is, and from a regional perspective as well, is that councils are really well versed in engagement. They can engage with their communities, and they have tools to do that. And I think the community strategic planning process is a testament to that. It's actually, the challenge is always going to be getting people interested in planning and strategic planning when you need them there, when you are making decisions right at the beginning.
Well, I mean, when bulldozers turned up, it galvanised people's attention, and that's part of the problem when you talk about strategic planning, is how do you actually get people involved at the beginning of that process when people are getting on with their daily lives. So, I mean, for me, the challenge is how do you actually put that sort of aspiration that was there in the proposal of the new planning system actually into effect? How do you actually get communities to overcome years of feeling as though they haven't had a say and no one takes them seriously? How do you get proponents to actually take seriously that they can actually learn from communities, and that can make the project better and it really is in their interest? How do you get the consultants that work on that to actually speak all up to the proponents to say this is what we're hearing and you should change this? I mean, we normally talk about communities being the problem. It's really normally quite easy to find out what communities think. It's quite often much more difficult to get people that engage them to actually to take on board that something to learn from that. So it seems to me, and one of the things that was talked about initially back in 2013 was there needed to be some cultural change managed in this, and I think we do have to think seriously about how we do that in the department, how we do that. Otherwise, what we're going to end up with is we're going to end up with a series of principles and participation plans which people will tick off, but won't actually change what's happening in the system. And unless you change what's happening in the system and get people involved early in that strategic planning stage, then you're going to have people who are out feeling as though with the changes, councils have been removed from the process, yet something else that we actually had some say in disappears, and you've got to give them something else, otherwise you're going to have a whole pile of people not going to be very happy.
I think I'd agree with Geoff in a lot of that sense. A big challenge is getting over the cynicism of the community, and whilst we might recognise that this presents a big shift in the philosophical approach, how do you explain to the community that there's a change here? How many of these government agencies and councils don't have some sort of statement on community engagement and consultation at this stage? How many major planning decisions aren't made without an explanation that goes back? So I think the process that you've got going ahead now in terms of actually formulating plans that are compelling and convincing in that manner is challenging. And it was also mentioned earlier that there is a desire for a kind of consistency and a uniformity, so that there's a consistency of expectations out there in the community. But then how do you provide the individual flexibility for the authorities to do what they need to do? And if you actually need uniformity, then why not have one big state kind of vehicle and mechanism to have this? And I suppose the third big challenge is how do we incentivise good outcomes and just wield the stick for getting bare minimum baseline?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what's already been said. I actually have a whole list of challenges. Can I go through them all? I pulled the resources at council and said, so what do we think the challenges are, everybody? So I'm trying to only give you the top. No. So, not in any... Okay, not in any order. So I suppose some of the feedback we had in terms of challenges was defining the negotiables and non-negotiables in actually what we're consulting on, what the parameters are of what they can influence. That was, I suppose, a learning that we've had, certainly in our planning outcomes. I think it is about cultural change, and certainly I know on the Northern Beaches we've spent a long time trying to make a cultural change with our engagement. Across the organisation, whether you're engaging on plan of management, a planning proposal, or a land use plan, or the local toilet block, so it's a real cultural change, and it has to be driven from within.
One of the most successful local councils, I'll say.
Thank you. It's only because Margie's put about 120 people through the IAP2 5-day training at council, so nothing there. But so it's been a really big journey for us. I think the other thing is the real detail for me, is about we've heard about the steps and the principles, and certainly we have those within our framework. So really now it comes down to the how, and I suppose the skeptics within our planning team may have a concern about timeframes. So resourcing and timeframes over and above what we already do, with the deadlines that we're set within the planning department. The 40 days DA and the 90 days planning proposals. It doesn't give you a lot of opportunity to do really great engagement that we struggle at, which means we don't have time frames.
Yeah.
So that's just some of them.
Thank you. I think I'd agree with all of those. The only one I think I would add is around building capability. It's a very difficult thing and challenging thing, particularly if you've got a very vexed issue you're engaging with the community on. You need resilience, and you can't retreat back to your shell. You need to stand and often take one on the chin and open heart on the sleeve, and that's the difficult thing, and definitely it requires capability building in organisations, and as Margie mentioned, I'm a total convert groupie, been through some Sandman training and IAP2, and I think it is very important to build that capability in organisations.
Okay, so I'm going to go to questions, but I appreciate that some people have burning points that they want to make, so ideally questions, but if you've got something that you really want to say in response to what you've heard, I'll equally accept that that's okay. Yep.
Hi, I'm Becky. I'm from... I don't use the microphone. I'm from yes. I was wondering, there was a lot of talk about cynical communities and how to get people to believe that they can have an impact. Our DP, this is one for you, Felicity, sorry. Our DP promoting this kind of proactive communications to tell people that there's changes and how it will affect them, and what will that look like?
Yes. We've been frantically trying every means possible. Before I came down here, I just got off the phone. Been working the phones all afternoon, calling every general manager in the state and offering assistance. We're also trying new innovative ways to reach people. Last year we actually had, Alison and I worked on a photography competition, and the concept of taking photos, community members, instead of making submissions in words and those very difficult things, people making written submissions, we're throwing around new ideas about how can we reach people, how can we engage with people better. Maybe it's through images, and so we're trying new things as well, and obviously using all the new forms, I guess, of communication, our social networks, obviously our website. We're just trying to reach. Yes, and a direct advertising campaign Alison was just mentioning as well, particularly for the independent and assessment panels.
That's all right. I'm afraid to use this thing, but I'll just speak really loud. My name's Michael Chalan, and for purposes of this question, I'll just identify myself as a PIA member. And this might sound a little bit more like a comment, but if it evokes a response, that's what I'm hoping for. It's not that hard to get people to participate. It's hard to get people to participate when we don't listen to them. But to the extent that we can have some wins for community, if they can start something or stop something or see more examples where they're meaningfully heard, I think it'll be a lot easier to engage them, and we don't have to worry about this so much. And I'd like to hear some responses to that, please.
I'll go to you, Geoff.
Yeah, look, I think the best way of doing that is to actually start trying to run some examples where it worked. I know when we were talking about 2013, we actually said to the department, just as urban growth was starting up central to Everley, here's a good example. Let's have a look at what this could actually look like. And for a few months, we actually had someone from the department, myself, consultants working on the early side of that, and that actually uncovered, I think, some of the issues that you come into. So my view would be that, first of all, you actually go back and review some of the things that are already happening, and how you might do that under a new way of doing that with the participation plans, and then also then to start looking, okay, let's take a new priority precinct or whatever comes up in that strategic planning space, and then let's look at how we might model something that would then be an exemplar for future ways of doing stuff.
Anyone? We don't want everyone to talk on everything, but
I'd just add that I think one of the challenges for the community is it's often not in the activities that are put out there, it's in the question of timing. And the fact that a lot of consultation and engagement comes out after decisions have been made. So we tend to speak to people from the rational finish line of a project, saying we've got all this evidence, isn't it a good idea, rather than the emotional sort of starting gun. And hopefully, we can get the confidence of decision makers to bring the opportunities forward to have those conversations that lead in and inform and support those decisions at earlier stages. That will play a big part in helping build that trust with the community, because it is difficult being out there when effectively decisions already been taken. And you're sort of talking about negotiables and non-negotiables, and it's sort of deck chairs effectively.
I'll come back out.
I just wanted to say, we did a lot of... we did a lot of work on the Northern Beaches Hospital Structure Plan, and that took us a good few years. And I think the other important thing that we've learned, and we actually mandate in our external framework, is a high-impact project has to have a minimum of stages. So rather than saying engage early, it's not just engage early, it's engage early and often, so that you can take people key steps and re-engage when you've got ideas, then you've got, sort of a discussion around options, and then you've got the final. Now, it does take more time, but the outcome I think we got from taking the community through that within the hospital project and others, it's taken a big, and it's a lot of work, but you get a better outcome.
It's a really great principle that was adopted by your council, and it's one that I constantly tell people, that because if you have two phases, you always have to come back, don't you, with something, so your feedback loop's automatically there. So
Hi, I'm Anna Bradley from Transport for New South Wales. This is around the capability issue. So in a big state government agency, we have planners, we have community engagement teams, and those people are allocated to all of our big projects. Ross and I fight on Sydney Light Rail, and we often refer to the commies as our allies. So we work hand in hand, and we are 100% aligned, wanting better engagement, earlier engagement. The problem is the challenges to engagement go much further up the line, in my experience. And so legislating and mandating absolutely helps us. That's our big stick when we have those discussions. But how do we get this philosophy and these principles further up the line to non-planners and politicians? Is it a marketing exercise? I don't know. Would be interested in your thoughts, Felicity.
I think there is a cultural change genuinely occurring. And we're just so fortunate. We genuinely have ambassadors for that change and change in engagement in our secretary and our deputy secretaries, and Brendan, he's this evening, in the Minister Robert. They're genuinely passionate about engagement, and they truly understand very much so the importance of it, because their political success is also dependent on it, of course. And so it really is, I can genuinely say it's coming from the top down. It's not at the officer level, that's generated this groundswell. It really has come from the top. So I think there is genuine cultural change across the board.
I'm going to go, sorry, I've got Sarah, I've got Ian, and I've got Rachel, and then I'll go to you, Di. But yes, I think, sorry, just to comment on that, I think sometimes maybe it's in the middle that there's something happening there, but there's something sort of lost in the middle, would be my own observation.
Hi, Sarah Riley from Queb Consulting. One of the most wonderful parts of community engagement is that you get to speak to subject matter experts, which is the community like Geoff, who know the area better than anybody else. What are the minimum standards? What are the minimum requirements of the new legislation? And how will they ensure that communities are engaged throughout this planning stages, as we talked about?
Maybe I'm just making a comment on a comment, is that my understanding is that the minimums haven't changed, the minimum requirements and exhibition periods, and so what we're relying on with the community participation plans is agencies taking to another level, and so it's taking what the minimum is now and recognising that there is an opportunity to get a better outcome. So if it's council or if it's transport or if it's the department, if they engage earlier, so in the writing into their community participation plans, those over and above requirements, and I guess like the two-stage consultation. I don't know, Felicity, if you...
No, I'd add to that the community participation principles are at the core of it as well. And so when planning authorities are going about preparing their plans, going back to those principles, which are, as I was mentioning earlier, at the core of it, it's no longer tick and flick, it's genuine. How do you provide opportunities for the community to engage? How do you close that loop? And so in working through developing the plan, going through those principles. I think it does go to the matter, there was a comment earlier on, and there's a constant tension in planning, in all areas of planning, between being too prescriptive and giving that sufficient flexibility for councils and planning authorities to tailor their plans to how they are going to engage with their community, and giving that flexibility. So it is the mandatory minimums, as but as we say, we don't want to race to the bottom, but we want to really showcase best practice, but the community participation principles are the other core.
One comment I'd like to make is we have to remember that people in the community are normally volunteers. They don't have a huge amount of time to do stuff. So one of the issues that's always there, especially when you have something like the right rail, where you get a load of documents that people are expected to somehow read through, and most councils can't do it within the period of time. So there needs to be mechanisms as part of that engagement earlier on, and in particular in terms of people to be able to see studies and get some of that underlying stuff explained to them. But it also has to come to grips with this sort of tension that's there in the system. You're dealing with a community that are doing it not on a paid basis, with consultants who have actually put in to do stuff within a particular time that's required by the proponent, and a time that's set, and then a mandatory time to actually exhibit. And that isn't really conducive in the normal course of events for communities to be involved. So you have to do those other things that are actually going to get the community involved, because the minimum won't actually do that.
Yeah. I'll go to Ian.
I don't need my My name's Ian Sinclair. I do rural planning, which quite a few of you probably don't do. One of the things about rural planning is that if you go into a small village like we did once, and it was touch football night, and suddenly we only had 5 people at the consultation, and we were told, well, if you'd come on the next night, we would have had a lot more people, and we said, well, we didn't know that and stuff. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is that if you are going to be, if the department or other people are talking about preparing some guidelines for consultation, please don't ignore the rural areas. And also a little thing like the regulation says that you have to put your advertisement in a newspaper that circulates once weekly in the local area. I did some work in Central Darling Council. Central Darling Council doesn't have a newspaper that circulates once weekly in the local area. It has a newspaper that covers part of its area. It has newsletters, but technically all of their EPIs are invalid because they haven't put the advertisement in an advertisement that circulates once weekly in the area. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is that please talk to the rural councils, talk to the rural areas, and think about people beyond the sandstone curtain, because people beyond the sandstone curtain provide you with food. And let's not forget about that. And the alcohol.
But it's not just the rural communities. We've just gone through an exercise in Waterloo where we've been asked about how to talk to the community. We've said this is how you should talk to the community. We've been ignored, and then the proponents have got most upset when we've been critical of the results that came out of that, because they didn't actually listen to the advice that they were given. So you need to talk to communities about what are the good ways of being able to talk to them.
Sorry, we go there and then Di.
Yeah, Rachel from Office, and I just wanted to do a follow-up question, a deep dive question in response to some of the responses that you gave about this having the high-level support, which is very good to hear. But when you talk to your ministers or your mayors or your proponents, do they really understand the consequence of this? They might get that, yes, engagement is a good thing, but it doesn't mean that they might have to shift policy, they might have to reduce their yield, they might have to lop off a few stories, they might have to actually, pay for a school park, they might have to do a number of different things that their business case and their financials don't actually direct them to do or suggest that they should be doing. In your conversations, are they really understanding the consequence of what this legislation really means?
One of you, I think it's one of you two. No, Kate, you've thought of this a million times. So
I know, but I'm being filmed. It's a hard one. I think we're very lucky, actually. I think our mayor and a number of our councillors actually do understand that, and they are prepared to make compromises. I think it's actually really hard for local councillors to make unpopular planning decisions or recommendations. And to be honest, we've had IAPs for a very long time, so we've only ever really got involved in planning proposals and sort of DCP, LEP type things. So, listen, I think they do understand that. I don't know all of the politicians, and I don't know that maybe even all the senior management really understand what I perceive, or what we perceive as community engagement is, and how you have to reflect on that and actually include it in your output. So I think that's a cultural change throughout all of us. But how do you educate people? And I see it as an education thing. How do you apply those principles, and what does it really mean?
I think they do, and I think you're right that probably not all politicians probably do, but I mean, in the planning space, it's land use conflict and contested land. Inherently, they really do understand it. I think we're on a journey, though. It's not going to happen overnight. That cultural change, it does take time. the organisations doing things a certain way, this is how we do things here. It's going to take time. It won't happen overnight. It's certainly happening rapidly in the department. I mean, we're on this amazing roller coaster ride at the moment in the department. And I was reflecting, actually, having worked in the department for 18 years. When I first joined the organisation, and I was the Walsh Bay Assessment Officer. And the way we went about our work was, the application gets in, I huddle down at my desk, I talk with my workmates, and I send the application up to the minister, and it's determined Bob's your uncle. Put it on the website and do a notification. It's a totally different space. It's unrecognisable. The space that we all work in now, and that journey, it's taken time, and I think there's so much more exciting things to come in that vein.
Sorry, I just want to clarify something, and just in terms of that and Rachel's comment, is that there is a difference here between a development application that we recognise and the engagement and opportunity to engage in an application that has a FISO against it. It's lodged and the clock's ticking, and some of the strategic planning work that we're involved with, so the DCPs, the planning proposals. And, there's a huge opportunity in the latter to really embrace the CPPs and get some really good outcomes for those elements. And, I don't really want to think quick wins, really the language, but the development application process is going to be more difficult because it is going to be much more of a cultural shift across proponents, consultants, councils, a huge change has to happen. It's not as big a leap, I think, for the strategy work.
I'd just add to that, though. If the CPP's done right, that's not, that we shouldn't necessarily assume that a process is going to be quite resistant, and even the private sector, because if development runs on certainty, and if you can provide proponents with greater certainty in what they're facing through the assessment process and what's expected of them in terms of engagement, and if you can really put the cherry on top and you can incentivise them to do a good job in engaging, then I think particularly some of the more enlightened proponents and developers, you will get a good response from that side of the market too.
No, because we're going to go, because I've got Di, and then back over there, right? Okay.
Thanks, Margie. Diane from Urbis. I would like to tackle the culture change piece from another angle, which is what are, in your views, the skills and capabilities that the modern engagement professional needs? We've talked a lot about uniformity and consistency of approach, and I'm really interested in your perspective from a community and council and government perspective of what does the modern engagement professional look like?
I'm interested in that question too.
Yes.
This is going to be quite controversial.
Yeah, that's fine. That's great.
We maybe need to get rid of it, in the sense that, and we're seeing this, young cohorts of kids coming out of university, have done planning, have done architecture, done other built degrees. They study the principle of engagement at university, they have an enthusiasm for it, and frankly, we sometimes as an industry put too many kind of communicators in the way between the technical professionals and the community. Geoff doesn't want to speak to me, really. He wants to speak to Felicity. But he wants to speak to Felicity in a way that, she's obviously empathetic and understanding, and, we act as that sort of like translator. But if we can stitch it in, actually part of what the built environment disciplines consider as an important part of their discipline, then I think, the process will ultimately be more successful. We just might not have jobs anymore.
I think So I think part of the cultural change I was alluding to was we have only, in fact, for many years we only had like a couple of engagement people for the entire organisation, and it was all done through the 140 project managers, whether they're a traffic engineer or a waste educator, they would be doing their engagement and we would be the capacity builder. So we would be the principles and the framework and the processes and support people, difficult conversations through training or mentoring, or co-assisting with them at difficult meetings. So prepping, role playing, and I think I think part of it's the empathy, and I think part of it's the ability to relate. But I think it has to be in everybody's job description to actually have that as part of what they want out of their role.
There's been a long history around community engagement. There are a lot of people who had a lot of experience in doing it. It's been out of vogue for quite some time, and I think we need to go back and rediscover some of that stuff that we did very well 20 odd years ago. And an example I would throw up that is that there was a handbook on the website for Landcom. Basically was a practitioner's handbook about how you went about community engagement. When it went across to urban growth, it stayed there. We ran an article in Inner Sydney Voice from Wendy Sarkissian that said, look, pick it up, do something with it, update it, there it is, and within days it came down off the urban growth website. Right? So that highlights to me another part of the problem. And the other part of the problem that I think we have to balance in all this is what is community engagement participation and what is comms. I think that one of the major problems that we're going to have, and it comes in particular out of government, is that they want to control the message. And if you want to control the message, it's difficult to have that conversation. I'm trying to do that at the present moment in Waterloo with land and housing, and I sat opposite a couple of people involved in running the community engagement today, and one of them was sitting there trying to off a bit of paper because he had been told that that's what he needed to do because they didn't actually trust him to say stuff because the message might not be right. I think that's where the danger is, and somehow you have to actually say what is it that is actually the problem of comms, and what is it is that you actually have to have the rough edges around in terms of community engagement.
Thanks, Heather Nesbitt from the Greater Sydney Commission. Congratulations to the department for the great work that they've done, and to all the speakers tonight. Some really good discussions. And thank you to PIA. Look, I'm a strong advocate for and supporter of community engagement for a long time. It's really great to see this legislation. I think it's really, really important. I suppose my question goes to whether there's opportunity to look at monitoring and reporting and compliance. Because, this is so important, and it's so important that we get agencies and everybody, all the planning authorities on board with this. And I'm a bit of a sceptic. I've been around a long time, getting very old. We want to see it work. We want to see agencies delivering on this, and, maybe some thought around how that could be reported individually, or some evaluation or monitoring. I'm not saying a big stick. I'm saying, not just case studies of best practice, but, what are you doing? How are you delivering? Are people engaging with your plans or whatever? I just think that again, it's that trust. It's that knowing that the process is working. And if the process isn't working, let's tweak it, and how can we make it work better? So it's trying to use that reporting in a positive way. So your thoughts on that, I'd be interested.
I'm an absolute avid believer in measurement and reporting, and I think certainly from our sort of journey over the last sort of probably 4 years, we instigated quite formal measurement against some of our key outcomes, which were things like you had to have an engagement plan for every high impact project. We monitor that and we measure that. You have to have closeout emails at every stage of the project to everyone who's made a submission or commented on a project. And we measure that too. So we've put in some quite formal reporting within the business to drive that cultural change. And while a bit of pushback initially, we're just measuring what we should have been doing. So therefore, I think it's got a lot more buy-in, and it's hard to do, but I think you get better outcomes if you do that.
Likewise, I think
we're on a journey of improving on our evaluation and monitoring. I think fair to say we're probably coming from a fairly low base, and so the only way is up. We're working with some experts, particularly from UTS at the moment, actually, in our monitoring and evaluation framework for the IHAPs. But certainly take that message that likewise it applies to all these new aspects of the planning system. And so, yeah, we are committed, though, to making improvements. And so continuous improvements. And that's what really monitoring and evaluation is hopefully about. How do you get even better?
I've got two more. No, sorry, those second chances. Sorry. Sorry. Did you want to make a comment though? Just because I've got two people lined up, but
I'll let the other people go then.
Yeah. Okay, Gabrielle.
I'll be quick. So it encompasses a lot of statements that have already been made, and about the point about community being at the core of the building or the centre of it. Last year, and this is also at a practical level, last year the community groups that I worked with, they all requested, you mentioned time for all the documents you've got to read. So this is around exhibition time and consultation period. And most of the groups I dealt with all wanted 90 days, and you've got a minimum of a month, and I have to admit they were well-informed citizens of community who knew the Act better than I did, and that would, if they do bother to look, I'm going to be disappointed because that was a repeated comment. And similarly with respect to when it's on exhibition, the viewing times were always in core working hours. Most of them were working people. And so I guess I'm asking, how realistic is it? Are we actually going to be able to do it? Because you also made the point about we're all busy and we've got project timelines, and usually the clients I work with want to fall back on that 1 month one. And there are times to do that, to contain, but the community will always ask for 90 days. Then I'm just wondering how realistic is that going to be? Like, is it actually going to happen? Because if that's the over and above that you've been talking about.
It does happen, not across the board certainly, but for example, for many of our major projects, we do go beyond routinely to 60 days, sometimes 90. And for our major policy proposals, normally 60 days. And so it doesn't, though, happen, across the board. I think I take, for example, the wind farms. When we actually prescribe at one stage that there should be a mandatory exhibition period, I think it was 90 days. And it led to so many delays in the planning system. In the case of Yass Valley Wind Farm, it was actually in the planning system for 5 years, in with the department. And I'm not saying it's, uniquely just the planning system that was the cause of that, but we that constant tension between being prescriptive and maintaining some flexibility in the system. So my experience on the mandatory times, mandatory extended exhibitions, it doesn't always necessarily lead to good outcomes, because in those cases for Yass Valley Wind Farm, the community living with that uncertainty of which way this project is going to go, that's not healthy for the proponent, the community, government, no one. And so, yeah, it's a delicate balance.
I think also there's an issue about what access to information you have beforehand. So one of the things that we were pushing for very strongly was to have requirements in the SEARs so that people got spoken to and had access to information early on in that piece. So if you have that sort of information and involvement earlier on, then everything doesn't come down to what happens in the window. But if it does down to what happens in the window, then it can become a real issue, especially on a major infrastructure project like the light rail.
Okay, Abby.
Abby Geoffs from Landcom. Picking up on the evaluation question, I'm interested in, as I understand it, one of the reasons behind the changes to the legislation were about trying to build community confidence in the planning system, again, recognising that it's pretty low, trust in government's low, trust in the planning system's low. Whether the department has got in place any kind of data to kind of understand what the level of confidence is now, and if we can visit that in 2 years, 5 years, to see whether all this is working, I think would be interesting.
I suppose I'd just add to that. I think it's a really good question because there's a buzzword that sort of flows through this stuff, which is participation, which is quite easy to, but it's not necessarily what we want. Is that we actually want to increase trust, and what you might find is trust increases, participation drops off. People, frankly, will to do than write submissions to EISs. So I actually think how we and you guys sort of measure that trust and confidence is a really important sort of thing.
I was just conferring with Alison here, and she can step in if I've correct. But we do a community participation survey. The department does, and no surprises that in the past we've had woeful scores, but we're certainly on the way up, and it's something I think the Secretary is actually measured against her performance agreement with the Premier. We take it really seriously, and
just a word about the community participation survey. It's annually around about August of every year. We survey a range of people who have had interactions with the department, from the community to proponents, other agencies, and quite closely track all of the trends. So we've been very pleased with the amount of ground we've been able to make up over the past few years. The numbers have trended up quite a high space in a short amount of time. It's been really encouraging for us, but certainly the measurement is there, and we would look to perhaps expand upon that for the community participation plans.
Yeah, just very, very briefly. I want to pick the trust question, because I think the trust question is crucial, and it's not just about the entire system. So if you're saying to people, we were involved in the early part of this and the strategic planning part of this, and if you get that right, you don't need to be involved at the other end as much, then it's the whole package that the trust is going to be based on. So it's not just a question of how many people have for the strategic planning, it's whether or not it actually works its way through the system, in my view.
Okay, and last question from Ian, if that's okay.
The question is more of a comment, again, about rural areas. People working in Sydney, you think you've got lots of resources in your council. In rural areas, there might be a planning director who is also the building surveyor and the town planner as one person. And they're also the comms team. And suddenly a big DA comes into that council, or a big planning proposal comes in, and they're swamped. So I'm just trying to say to you that in the rural areas, it's not as easy as it is in metropolitan areas. You think you've got resources problems in metropolitan areas. Some councils, they might have a planner and a planning director who is also a building surveyor, and the planner's a building surveyor as well. So it's one of these things that we just need to understand that it is very difficult in the rural areas, and it's not as easy as people might think.
Okay, great. I'm going to wrap up, but this is not the end, because Brendan's going to come on in a little while and do some stuff. But I do want to wrap up this part and give a thank you to Liz, to Geoff, who gives a lot of time all the time. It seems so